Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's episode, I'll be diving back into the world of Niagara systems and creating this stunning custom fireball effect using multiple emitters and custom textures. Before we get started, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin with, we're actually going to create the texture that we're going to be using for this. I already have one that I like to use. I've used it for most of my projects now for this channel. This smoke, it's just a little custom noise texture that I use, and you can make your own. You can make it just like this, try to mimic it if you want. But if you open up any kind of, I like to use 3D Paint, but you can use Paint or any kind of art app or program. You can make this. And mine is set to 512 by 512. We want it square. And then this is a grayscale noise texture. So you want the background to be set to black, just like that. And then I like to grab a spray can and just kind of start spraying all over the place until you get something that looks like that texture that I just showed you. Doesn't have to be perfect. The more variants that there is, the more unique your texture will look and your material is going to look. So just something like that would do. Then save this as a PNG and import it. But I already have mine here. So this is the one that I want to use. From here, we want to set up a material so we can use this. So right click, make a material. And the first one I'm going to call M Fireball. And let's go ahead and open that up. To start with, we want this to be translucent so we can use opacity and this emissive color. So if you highlight your output, come up to blend mode and go to translucent and shading model, do unlit. This is going to be similar to how I've set up materials in the past. So we're going to start with a particle color, a texture sample, and then a radial gradient. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take we need to set our texture sample. We're going to set it to that smoke that we just created. So go ahead and set this to smoke. And then come off of your red here, and we're going to say multiply. And we're going to multiply this with the radial gradient. Then from here, I want to come back up and say multiply again. And this is going to multiply with the alpha of our particle color. And then this will plug right into our opacity. And you'll start to see the empty space around your smoke. Your smoke's black. We want to set that to be ready for this particle color. To do that, I'm going to come off of the RGB and say multiply. And then we're simply going to multiply this with the product of our texture sample and radial gradient. And then we're going to plug this into emissive color. So now you can see the smoke coming through on your particle. One thing we're going to do is we want to be able to affect this density here. So if you hold S and click, you'll get a scalar parameter. And we could set this directly like this, and we'll change this in a moment once we see what this does, but this will let us directly affect our density here. If we want it to be lighter, that might be too light. The emissiveness will actually, it's kind of deceiving. It's hard to see here, but once it's in your particle, it's going to be a lot brighter. So this density will play a bigger role later. So I just put this here just to show you. We're actually going to use a dynamic parameter to set this. So for now, I'm going to remove that. We also want to be able to change which parts of this that we're seeing. So we're going to come off of our UV, and I'm going to start with a panner. And for this panner, if you set this to your X and Y, you can see it start moving whichever way you want. Again, we're going to use that dynamic parameter to set this as well. So for now, I'm going to leave those as 0. Behind this panner, let's go ahead and get a text coordinate. This is going to allow us to change the tiling of our U and V. And then we're also going to grab our dynamic parameter, which will show up in our Niagara system once we apply this material, and we'll be able to change these parameters here. The first parameter that we're going to set in this, if you come into your details panel with dynamic parameter highlighted, you can change these to anything you want. We're going to name this first one tiling. The second one is going to affect the speed here, and I'm going to call this speed. And then the third one's going to affect this density, so I'm going to call this density. So off the tiling, we're going to multiply the coordinates here with this tiling factor. So just multiply these two together, and this is going to plug into your coordinate. For the speed, I'm just going to plug this directly into the speed, and we'll change this later as we go. I'm not going to do anything too complicated with this affecting these separately. Right now, I'm just going to simply do it all at once. And then with density, I'm going to plug that directly into density. And then that's going to do it for this first material. For the second material, I'm actually just going to copy and paste this. And I'm going to rename this to be Fireball, or maybe Fire Smoke, or we'll just call it Smoke. And then we'll go ahead and open this up. And these are actually going to be the exact same for this. But I like to make these separately in case we make any changes to this on the way. So there's really going to be nothing different here. And if we would have used the same material, we would have actually been able to still control those separately, and we would have seen really no difference. But just to be safe, in case we, like I said, make any changes in here, I'm going to have a second material here. And you may not actually like this texture that you've come up with, so you may end up applying a completely different texture here. So it's just better to have these set up separately. So now that we have our material set up, let's go ahead and start our Niagara system. So right click, create Niagara system. And I'm just going to do an empty. We're going to start this from scratch. So, and I'm going to call this NS Fireball, and go ahead and open that up. The first thing I want to do is rename my initial emitter here, and I'm going to name it Fireball. Let's go to emitter state. And first, let's just set this to maybe infinite so that we can see without having to wait for it. In our emitter update, let's add a spawn rate so we can see it spawn. I'm going to just do 1 here for now. Then we see our emitter here. Go to initialize particle. Let's give this a color. So under color mode, go direct set. And I'm going to do something here like I just want it red. So I'm going to do something red, and multiplying this by higher than 1 is going to give that more emissive look. So I want to stick with that for now. The other thing I want to do is go to my sprite size mode, and I'm going to do a uniform and about a 35. The next thing I want to do now is go to the sprite renderer, and I want to set this to our fireball material that we just created. And now if you look, you can see it kind of moving around. One thing you'll notice is you can start to see the corner of where it's tiling at. So we're going to play with those parameters that we set. And to do that, we're going to go to the particle update and say dynamic material parameters. And here we have access to all of our parameters that we set up. To begin with, you can play with these numbers a little bit to see what they're going to look like. And then if you add some speed to it, you start to get that motion there. And you'll just have to, since your material doesn't look just like mine, it's better to kind of play with this tiling to see what you want it to be. For me, I think I'm going to stick with that for this first part. And we don't really need to do anything too complex here. For this one. So just getting that initial motion here, some light, and kind of looking like flame overlay is going to be good enough. We can up this speed a little bit just to make it look a little crazier. So I'm going to leave mine like that for now. The next thing we're going to want on here is a collision so that our particles will kind of bounce off of things as it goes. So that's going to be good for that. And that's all we're going to do for this first part for now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another emitter. Just make it an empty one. And I'm going to rename this trail. To start with, do emitter state. We want this to be self and infinite. Let's go ahead and do, to spawn this, we're going to spawn it from this fireball. So let's do under particle spawn, sorry, under emitter update, do spawn particle from other emitter. The emitter that we want to spawn this from is fireball, so we need to set this name here. I'm actually going to make sure you hit fix issues if you have issues. For back in your spawn particles from other emitter, I'm going to set the spawn rate to 250. Make sure you match, or this one needs to be a little higher. I like to just match them. Then let's go to our initialized particle, and I'm going to do a random for life. And this is going to be a pretty short life, so somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2. I also want to set a color here. So say direct set. And I'm going to set this to kind of an orangish color here. Think that looks pretty good for now. Maybe something like that for now. Down in your particle update, we're going to add a few things here. I want to add a scale sprite size, and I want this to be a linear ramp down. In the initialized particle, I also want to set the sprite size mode. So I'm going to do a uniform here, and this will be 20. Again, these are all numbers that you can play with on your own, and if you don't like the way that they look. In emitter state, I'm going to set the loop duration to 2 to match this first one also. Make sure everything is looking how I want it. Let's get rid of the blue. Wasn't making too big of a difference, but I just want just this right here. We can still play with these a little bit if we want it to be a slightly different color. Okay. So scale sprite size we've set to be the linear ramp down. A couple things I want to add here. I'm also going to add a drag, and I'm going to keep this pretty low for now. We can play with that as we go. And then I'm going to add a gravity force. The gravity force I don't want going down. Flames tend to go up and smoke tends to go up, into heat rises. So I'm going to set that to about 500, and that'll slowly try to go up over time. I'm also going to do a scale color. The only thing I want to affect on my scale color is a scale alpha, so that over time it disappears, it fades away. So I'm going to do a float from curve, and then keep that linear ramp down. The only thing I'm going to do just for while we're getting this set up is I'm going to go to my fireball spawn rate, and I'm actually going to lower this, and we'll adjust that later as well. And in fact, we could do, I'll just leave it how it is. That way we're just getting the one that shows up. So from here, we're going to create another emitter. So far, we're not seeing anything happen, mainly because it's spawning this emitter, but they're not moving, so it's just spawning right over it. We'll make sure we change that in a little bit. But the next thing we're going to do is create another emitter. So add emitter, just an empty. And let's rename this to tail 2. Again, emitter state will go to self and infinite. Just matching that same loop duration. And then in your emitter update, going to do another spawn particles from other emitter. Go ahead and fix all your issues. And now we're going to spawn this one from our fireball as well. So select fireball. And for this, the spawn rate, I'm going to set this one higher. Or sorry, not higher, to 200. In our initialized particle, I'm going to do another random for life, and this is going to be 0 0.1, 0 0.3. Once we get this set up, we can play with a lot of these numbers to see if it's how we want it. But for now, I'm just going to go through and set these so that we can see them. I'm just going to do a pure red here. And I want to set the sprite size mode. We're going to do another random uniform and setting this to be 10 minimum, 25 max. For this one, I'm going to also set a shape location so it doesn't spawn in the same spot. It'll spawn inside of the sphere, and we'll give that sphere a radius of 10. The next thing I also want to do is give this a velocity. So under the particle spawn, I'm going to say add velocity. And I'm just going to keep this at 50 for now. 50 in the z direction, so it's starting the particles upward. Next, we'll work on the particle update section. I want to do a scale sprite size. And for that, I'm going to do the linear ramp down again. So the longer this is alive, it's going to get smaller and smaller. I'm going to add a drag on this one. Again, just setting this low. Next, let's also add a curl noise. This way we can get a little bit of random variance in the behavior. And I'm going to set the strength to 500 and leave the frequency alone. I'm also going to add a gravity force. In this gravity force, I want it to be upward, but I don't want every particle to move upward at the same rate or be affected by the gravity force at the same rate. So I'm going to come over to the gravity force, and I'm wanting to say random range vector. And the minimum is going to be a 200 in the upward z direction, nothing in the x and y directions. And then this is going to be a max of 1000. So our particles will move upward like that. Next, we're going to go to our renderer, our sprite renderer, and I'm going to add that fireball smoke to this one. Or I named it smoke. So now it's starting to look more like smoke on top of this. And some things we can do now in our particle update, we can go to that dynamic materials parameter. We'll add that in here. And we want to just kind of play with this to get what we want to see. I'm going to isolate this for now. So let's go ahead and fill all these in so we can see it. Our density being 0 was keeping us from seeing it. And then we'll play with these numbers to get the look that we want. I'm going to start with maybe 0.5 here. I want the speed to be slower. And then the density, that might be a little too bright, a little too dense. So I'm going to do something like that for now. Again, you can play with this to get the look that you want. and kind of change it as we go. I want to leave it like this for now on mine. Let's actually see what the tiling looks like a little higher. If you go, if you tile it a lot, it starts to look blurred more. If you tile it like really a lot, it's just kind of a blurry flame, which would be true for just about any image or texture you're using here. So if you want to override this and just give it this blurry look, you can always knock your tiling way, way up. But that's not really what I want to do. I'm going to leave mine down here for now, and we can change that as we go. The final thing that we're going to do, um, or take the isolation off of this one. The next thing I want to do is add one more emitter before we start really tuning this in to make sure it's what we want to see. And this emitter is going to be the final smoke. So I want to rename this to be just smoke trail. And inside the smoke trail, we're going to start with emitter state, do self infinite. Again, we're going to spawn from another emitter, fix all your issues. And then for this one, we're going to spawn this from our first tail or first trail. This should say trail 2. So select your spawn particles from other emitter, and I'm going to do that first trail on this one. And I want to set this one to 100, 100, and 100. In initialize particle, let's do another random here. And this one's going to be kind of a bigger spread than the others. I'm going to go 0.2 to 0.12. And for this, let's say direct set, and I'm going to set this to be some kind of dark red for now. And then in sprite size, I'm going to say random uniform. And this is also going to have a pretty big difference. So 1 minimum and 25 max for the size. To add a little variance to these, I'm actually going to go back through in all my sprite rotation modes. I'm going to set these to random as well. And I'm going to do that for each of these. And I'm going to leave the first one alone. The next thing I'm going to do in my smoke is in my particle spawn. Also going to give this a shape location, and this is going to be the same thing, a sphere with a radius of 10. And let's go ahead and go to your sprite render. I'm going to go ahead and apply that fireball material to this. That way we can kind of see what we're going to look like here. So let's start changing the smoke a little bit. The first thing I want to do in the particle update is I'm going to add a scale sprite size. Again, with that linear ramp down, that's already starting to help. I'm going to add a drag, setting it to the same as the others. Let's do a curl noise force. And for the curl noise force, let's go with 250 for the strength. I also want to do a gravity force in here. And I'm going to do similar to this last one with the gravity force where we went random between 200 and 1000 in the Z direction. So I'm going to select random range vector and I'm going to go 200, set all X's and Y's to 0, and then do 1000 here. So now smoke is the force is pushing that smoke upward, which is kind of what we want to see. I'm going to do a scale color in here as well. And for this scale color, we're still just going to affect the alpha. So I'm going to do float from curve. And for this one, you can do the ramp, or sometimes I like to do the drop off just to make it a hard, thick, dense smoke, and then just fall off real sharp at the end. So you can do either of these and it'll look good. And the final thing we're going to add to this smoke is that dynamic material parameters so that we can uh, affect that material. And to start with, let's do ones for all these so that we can see it. So this is what it did look like, and then you'll just play with these uh, parameters to see what you want it to look like. Maybe slow down the speed a little bit, and maybe that's not even making too big of a difference that we can really notice for the smoke. Maybe do even smaller for the tiling. I think that looks pretty good. So now we can actually go and play around with some of these numbers to see what changes we can get here. Let's start with the first trail here, and maybe let's raise this number up and see how that affects it. It's also going to trickle down, so anything that's coming off the first trail is also going to have more spawns from that. So anything you change here, you might have to adjust your smoke later. Let's leave that at 250 for now. And let's try this one. Take this one to 250. That kind of looks like there are a little more embers on it, so that might be a better number for that. Or we can try something even higher. I think that smoke might be coming in a little strong. First, I'm going to set this back to 250 on each. I kind of like that. For the smoke, let's try to take this down a little bit and see what that looks like. That might be a little better for what you're looking for. We can do, we can also set the smoke alpha to be kind of half of what, that way it's not quite as dense. But the other way we can affect the density would be with our dynamic parameter. And maybe that's what we want, is this density to be less. Maybe take that to 0.5. That way it doesn't block out as much of these flames coming off of it. So something like that might be a good way to change this. For now, I'm going to kind of leave it like that. You can change a lot of things about this to make it look how you want it, including your upward velocities, your gravity, uh, the amount of particles that are being spawned, the amount of particles being spawned from other emitters. Uh, that'll give you a lot different look. The alpha or the density in your dynamic material parameters. Changing this stuff around is really we're going to get a lot of the big changes, especially for these bigger sprites where you see more of that texture. But to test this in our level and to make sure it looks all right, because we still have this trail here that we haven't really seen because it spawns from behind this initial fireball. I'm going to go to my particle spawn and I'm going to do an add velocity. And this add velocity, um, let's do, let's have this kind of shoot like a cannon. So it'll shoot off that way. And let's add our gravity in. So go to your particle update and let's add a gravity. And for gravity, I'm just going to leave it at Earth gravity. So this will start to look kind of like a missile firing or a fireball being thrown. And then let's take this into our level. I guess we can leave it where it's at. And let's go ahead and play it and see what this looks like. I think that looks pretty good. Let's also, let's do, let's disable the velocity and let's just give us one to look at and see. So is what I did. I disabled velocity. I went to my spawn rate. It's still 0.5. I went to emitter state and I set this to once. And I'm just going to do fixed here, keep the same loop duration. And in an initialized particle, I'm going to jump this life up a lot so we can look at it for a while. And then I'm going to move this up so we can watch it fall. See what I did here. Set the spawn rate to 1, maybe. There we go. So now we'll see that fall. Collision makes a bounce. And it looks like a little fireball. It did just fall through the ground, it looked like. Yeah, if we set this higher, it should keep its, it'll bounce back to the exact same height that it fell from. It doesn't lose any energy from bounce. So we can kind of see if that's what we want it to look like while it's moving. And I think that looks pretty good. And like I said, there's a ton of ways you can customize this, whether it's just changing the color around. Maybe you want it to be green in all this. Let's see what some of this looks like. So plenty of ways to customize it or change it, whether it's the trail, you can change the way the trail is messing with your curl noise. If you take that up even more on a few of these. So let's just take our curl noises up even more. and see what that looks like. Starts to look kind of like sparks off the back. You can, if you change the life, make those even lower, it'll make the tail a lot shorter. For instance, if I take the smoke down to like 0.4, they die off a lot quicker. So kind of a shorter smoke. I lost my um, collision restitution. So that one, if you kill the smoke off quicker, it's a shorter tail. Tons of ways to customize it. So if we turn the restitution back down to zero point 0.6 and we saw how the particle was kind of falling through the floor, they kind of fall through the ground there. The reason for this, or the way to fix it, is if you move this collision under gravity force and then go back and watch again, then that doesn't happen. They just sit there. That way, it's seeing that gravity force and taking that into account for collisions. So make sure that these are in the right order. There's one final thing that we can that I want to do for this to add a little more effect to it. In this initial tail here, I'm going to add a light renderer. And in this light renderer, I'm going to match my color here. So I'm going to go to light renderer. You don't have to match it exactly. So kind of whatever you want to do in here, but you do like 500, get kind of a emissive red glow there. It goes red, green, blue, similar to red, green, blue. So let's go look at that. I also want to turn up the radius. I want to kind of double it just to also get that glow that on the ground there. Or if these are, let's turn this off and let's make this only go in the Y direction for this so we can see this a little better. And let's bring this one down. Oh, I might have just put that too far down. But that way you get that almost red fire glow coming off of this. So that's going to do it for today's episode. In this episode, we successfully created a fireball effect using multiple emitters and custom texture. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future episodes. As always, happy developing, and I'll see you in the next one.